Friday the 13th, Road Trip, Chapter 12, Peep Show. Which cabin are they in? That one. Are you sure? Or maybe that one. Moron. Shut up. You shut up. Russ had stretched out his large bulk on the uncomfortable metal springs of the bottom bunk. He watched his two teammates whispering like 5-year-olds at the open window of their cabin as they peered out into the darkness. Slick and Dave weren't the most mature guys on the planet to begin with. You guys are pathetic, you know that? He asked in a low voice. Slick didn't even turn from the window to look at him. I'm gonna sneak a peek, he told Dave. Dave grinned. Excellent idea, Commander. I'm coming with you. They high-fived and, laughing hysterically, headed for the cabin door. What about you, Russ? Are you in? Slick asked him. Come on, Russ. Free peep show, Dave said. Nah, Russ said. I'll pass. Slick shook his head disapprovingly. Poor Russ. He's so afraid of Belinda, he can't even think straight. That's not why, Russ said. But the truth was, that was a large part of the reason. I don't think it's very... He hated the word he was about to say, but couldn't think of a better one. Nice to spy on girls like that. Outside, the storm finally let up. Slick pounced on the word like a loose football. Nice? What kind of a Boy Scout are you, Johnson? Come on, Dave said. Forget about him. We better hurry or we're going to miss all the action. Slick was still in the doorway, and Russ could tell he was going to take one more pot shot before he left. It's just so sad, he told Dave, the way poor Russ is so afraid of his little missus. I know, Dave agreed. He's been hanging around with her for almost a year, and he's still not getting any. Slick chortled. Ha! You better come with us, Russ. It's the only way you'll ever get to see Belinda naked. Russ could feel his anger beginning to rumble deep inside him, but he stayed right where he was as they disappeared into the darkness. When they were gone, he got up off the bed. The rain had pretty much slowed to a halt now. In the distance, he could hear the giggling of the girls floating through the cool night air. He wanted to go warn them. Good move, Russ, he told himself. He was already the only black kid on the football team, and ostracized every way to Sunday. All he had to do was rat on the captain and star receiver, then he'd really be Mr. Popular. On the other hand, he hated to think of the guys spying on Belinda. For one thing, Belinda was so into control. It would kill her if she found out they had peeped. But Russ was having another reaction that surprised him. Slick had gone out with Summer, and presumably what he was going to see in that cabin would be no surprise to him. Even so, it burned Russ bad to think of Slick and Dave peeking in at Summer Stone. Russ shook his head. Watch it, homeboy, he told himself. Watch it. Summer unzipped her orange parka and hung it over the rusty screen door of cabin number 9. She ran her hands back through her dark hair, squeezing and wringing out the water. Missy unzipped her black jumpsuit, stepped out of it, and pulled off her striped t-shirt. Giggling, she started doing a majorette number as she removed her underwear, flinging the wet bra and panties to either side of the dark cabin with 2 loud splats. Summer laughed and applauded. Stark naked, Missy chanted, "Sting 'em, hornets!" and danced around the cabin as she did the cheer. Belinda was in the corner, facing the wall as she peeled off of her wet clothes. That was Belinda all over. In the gym, she always stood close to her locker when she changed. She had once told Summer the reason. It wasn't just modesty. She couldn't get over her fear that some guy might be spying on her. Belinda, Summer now told her, wriggling out her own sopping wet jeans. You can relax. We're in a dark and empty cabin. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's just us in here. No one can see us. No one except the birdies, Missy chirped. Belinda didn't turn around. Well, I don't want the birdies seeing me either, she said, and they all laughed. Missy did a cartwheel and ended up bumping right into Belinda. "Watch it," Belinda warned her. "Sorry," Missy said. Then she looked down at her perfect skinny body and critically pinched the flesh above her left hip, trying to raise some flab where none existed. "Listen, guys," she said. "Can I ask you a very serious question? Like, do you think I'm putting on any weight?" Missy lived in terror of putting on an extra ounce. She figured her body was her only asset in life and the only thing that kept Dave close. She was probably right, thought Summer. "You're losing weight," Belinda told her. "In the brain." Missy laughed, then got the joke and frowned. "Like, that's not nice," she said. Missy always hated jokes about her intelligence. When she got them. She pulled open her knit bag and pulled out her cheerleading clothes. Summer had removed the last of her clothing. She moved to the window, looking out into the darkness, breathing deep draughts of the country air. She didn't feel in any hurry to put on her sweaty cheerleading uniform. She felt so clean. Then, somewhere out there in the darkness, she heard a twig snap. She ducked back away from the window. "What is it?" Belinda hissed, covering herself with both hands. They all listened. "Nothing," Summer said, shaking her head. "I'm getting paranoid is all." She picked up her orange and black cotton cheerleading shirt and slipped it on. She peered around at her friends as they suited up as well. She laughed. "What?" Belinda asked. "I don't know. Feels kind of funny for us to be putting on our cheerleading outfits out here in the middle of the woods, doesn't it? Like we're gearing up for a big game." Huffing and puffing, Coach Wardell jogged down the muddy road. His heart was pounding, threatening to burst. But he told himself he had to keep going. He had to make it to the end zone without getting tackled or the game was lost. In this case, the end zone was the van. Coach was running so hard he went right by the spot where the van had gone off the road. Then he saw the tire tracks. He hurtled down the culvert. He almost tripped. The van was parked farther down than he remembered. Maybe Slick or Dave had gotten the van started. "Guys!" he yelled hoarsely. There was no response. "Slick! Dave!" He reached the van. It was empty. The terror that had gripped him so firmly from the moment he saw the dying woman now squeezed even tighter. The kids were gone. He leaned against the van for a moment, almost choking. He was so out of breath. Then he started jogging aimlessly from tree to tree, calling the kids' names when he could get the breath out. "Summer! Missy! Russ! Dave!" Then he heard it. The telltale rustle of leaves, the thump of footsteps. Someone was coming. He turned. Grunting, a figure came out of the woods. Whoever it was, he was running right at him. Coach Wardell shrunk back. The man was wearing an evil-looking white mask, pitted with dark holes. Chapter 13. Spin the Bottle. The man in the mask fell to his knees in front of Coach. He was grunting loudly, but his words were garbled. The man lifted his two hands together, as if begging for Coach's help. The hands, Coach saw, were tightly bound, just like the dying woman's. There were more footsteps crunching over twigs and brush. Both men turned as the trooper stepped out of the woods. Coach felt a surge of relief. Help had arrived. He stepped forward, arms outstretched in greeting, just as the trooper fired his gun. Coach staggered back. It felt like he'd just been nailed by a 300-pound nose tackle. He fell back against the van, rolled, slid down with his head by the front tire. There was a bullet hole smack in the center of Coach's chest. His eyes and mouth were open wide like a mask. The man in the hockey mask scrambled to his feet and was running again as the trooper took aim. It was hard to tell whether it was still raining. The cool night breeze kept whipping fat drops of water off the overhanging trees. Summer led the way as they tromped back into the cabin. Slick and Dave were sitting on an upper bunk. They both had strange looks on their faces, blank. But right away Summer knew they were up to something. "We're back," Missy sang. She made a beeline for Dave, and since she couldn't reach his face, shook a wet sneaker. "Did you miss me?" she asked. Dave and Slick looked at each other as if they were exchanging a private joke. "Oh yeah," Dave said. He was smiling. "I really missed you." "You didn't miss much," Slick said, and they guffawed. "What's going on?" Belinda asked, angry. She poked Russ. He was sitting up on the lower bunk, looking a little sick. He didn't meet Belinda's gaze, or Summer's for that matter. "Nothing," he muttered. He got to his feet wearily, gave them all a sick smile. "Come on," he said. "We better get back to the van." "Why?" Slick asked. He hopped down from the upper bunk. "Buzzy'll come get us when Coach gets back. Let's hang, man." "Slick's right," Dave said. "It'll probably be hours before Coach gets to a gas station and they can fix that van." "Hours?" Belinda jammed a fist into her hip. Her eyes flashed. "But we've got the victory party tonight." "Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to make it," Dave said. "Yep, looks like we're going to have to party out here," Slick said. Summer felt it again. That tension in the air. Slick was looking at her. She lowered her gaze. "Party! Party time!" Missy cried. "Missy," Belinda said, "we're not having any party." "What? What do we have to party with?" Missy looked crushed. Then she brightened. "Like, I know. We can play party games." She looked around the room, squinting into the dark corners in search of inspiration. She spotted an empty Coke bottle, the old-fashioned glass kind with the thin, tapering spout, and pounced on it. "Aha!" Everyone looked at her dumbly for a moment. Missy just grinned. "Spin the bottle," she explained. The tension that Summer had felt in the small, dark cabin instantly doubled. "No way," Belinda said. "Way," corrected Slick. He draped an arm around Missy's shoulder. "That's a great idea you got there, Missy." Missy raised her chin with pride. "You see, Missy, you're not so stupid after all," Slick went on. Missy kept smiling, but Summer could tell she wasn't so sure she liked that compliment. Slick took the bottle from Missy, stuck his finger in the spout, and twirled it. "Form a circle, everybody," he said in his lowest, sexiest voice. "I said no," Belinda said. Summer could see the panic on her face. For a control freak, things were sure getting out of control. "Like, oh, Belinda," said Missy, slapping her on the back. "Don't be a party pooper." "Yeah, Belinda," Dave said. He cuffed her shoulder. "It'll be fun." Still twirling the bottle, Slick sat down on the cabin floor. Dave sat across from him. Missy immediately plopped down right next to Dave. She reached up and tugged at Belinda's hand. Summer wasn't feeling too keen on the game herself. There were two basic possibilities, and they both terrified her. One, Slick would have to kiss somebody besides her. Two, Slick would have to kiss her. "Russ," Dave barked, "down on the floor. I'm speaking as your captain now." Russ looked at Belinda, as if for approval. "Don't look at her, man," Dave said. "You're playing this game with us or you're off the team." Summer saw the look of pleading Russ was giving Belinda. "Come on, Belinda," Summer said. "Let's just get it over with." As soon as they had all set, Missy yelled, "I spin first because, I thought of the game." She took the bottle from Slick, and it made a little pop as it came off his finger. She knelt in the center of the circle and spun the bottle hard on the rough old floorboards. The bottle spun and spun. Finally, it began to slow down, its spout pointing first at Dave, then Russ, then Slick, then Dave, Then Russ. "Please don't stop on Slick," Summer prayed. "Please don't stop on Slick." So, of course, the bottle stopped on Slick. Or at least it was pointing a lot closer to Slick than to Dave. But Missy immediately squealed. "Goody, I get to kiss Dave." She traced a crooked line across the floorboards from the spout of the bottle to her boyfriend. "But it was pointing at Slick," Dave said with a half-smile, trying to ward her off. But she grabbed his head and held it and planted a loud, long kiss right on the lips. "Okay," he said, trying to pull away. "That's enough." But she wasn't through. She kept kissing him until Slick finally called. "Gong!" "I love this game," Missy said happily. Dave didn't look so pleased. Dave spun next. The bottle pointed right at Missy. Now Dave looked really annoyed. He gave Missy a friendly peck. Missy gave her next turn to Belinda, who spun the bottle hard. There was no doubt this time. It pointed straight at Slick. Belinda laughed. "All right," she said, sounding very pleased. More than once Belinda had told Summer that Slick was the hottest white guy she'd ever seen. "Sorry, Summer," Belinda now said, "but he's gonna get it." She marched purposefully over to Slick, who smiled as she approached. She pretended to fix her clothes and hair. Then she started to kiss him, on the lips. The kiss went on and on. There were cheers and catcalls from Dave and Missy. Russ and Summer were both silent. Finally, Belinda lifted her head and grinned at the rest of the group. "Sorry about that, Summer, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity." "Don't apologize to me," Summer said. "He's all yours." That's what she said, but what she was feeling was nausea. And then Dave asked Slick how the kiss was. Slick smacked his lips and sighed loudly. "Delicious," he said. "My turn," Summer said. She grabbed the bottle and spun it. It landed on Russ. Good, she thought. She hated the idea of kissing Dave, but she would have done it right then and there just to get at Slick. But kissing Russ? That was something she'd kind of wanted to do anyway. She smiled at Russ, who looked extremely nervous. "Don't you even think about it," Belinda warned him. "Why?" Missy asked. "Belinda, that's like not fair. You totally kissed Slick." "Kiss her. Kissed her," chanted Slick and Dave. That burned Summer, but she knew Slick was faking. "I'm telling you, Russ Johnson, you kiss her and you're dead meat," Belinda went on. "You kiss her and you can kiss our relationship goodbye. You got it?" Russ turned and stared at her levelly. "Belinda," he said, "why are you always ordering me around?" There was a loud ooh from Slick and Dave. Summer hesitated. As much as she wanted to get Slick back, she didn't want to get Russ in trouble. Russ nodded to her. She raised her eyebrows as if to ask, "Are you sure?" He nodded again. "Russ!" cried Belinda. Summer moved forward. Her eyes were locked on Russ's now. She knelt in front of him, smiled. He smiled back. It was strange. It felt awfully natural somehow, being this close to Russ. And then he gently hooked his large hand behind her head and lowered his large head toward hers. Their lips met. "You're gonna die," she heard Belinda say. But it was as if there were no one else in the room, as if Russ and she were all alone sharing the most private moment. The kiss was long and tender. Her hands went around the back of Russ's neck and roamed around his broad, powerful back. His big hands were on her back too, not moving but firmly planted, holding her in place. Finally, he pulled his head back. She had never seen his eyes look so serious. "You'll pay," Belinda said, and she stormed out of the cabin. Chapter 14. Jason. For a moment, no one spoke. Summer was looking down at her shoelaces, which were soggy and untied. She couldn't look at Russ. She couldn't look at Slick. She didn't feel like she could look at anybody. Russ crossed to the doorway. "Belinda!" he yelled. He waited a second, then called again. Still no response. Cursing, Russ moved out into the night. Slick, who was sitting cross-legged, stood up without using his hands. Summer lifted her gaze. He was staring straight at her. He walked toward her, hands in the back of his pockets of his jeans. He stood over her, looking down. "Have fun?" he asked. "Lots," she said. "Great game, huh?" "If you know how to play." Missy had her arms around Dave's neck as usual. "Like, what do you mean, Summer? The rules are pretty easy." "Uh-huh," Summer said. "But some people can't play by the rules even when they're easy ones." Dave was staring past Missy at Slick, signaling him by lowering his eyebrows hard. "What?" Slick asked, as if he didn't know what Dave meant. Then he pretended to get it. "Oh, you and Missy want to be alone, huh?" Dave's eyes widened, and he started to shake his head in protest, but Missy squealed with delight. "You do?" cried Missy. "Oh, Dave, this is so sweet. Summer, did you hear what he said?" "I heard," Summer said. She also felt. Slick had a hold of her hand now, pulling her to her feet. It felt so good. "Hand, you're a traitor," she silently yelled at herself. "Come on," Slick said, guiding her to the open door. "Let's give them some space." Dave followed them out of the cabin, hissing at Slick to stick around. But Slick kept pulling Summer forward, into the wet and dripping darkness. As they walked away from the cabin, Summer heard Dave and Missy's voices receding. "Do you love me?" Missy asked Dave. "I told you, you can only ask me that twice a day." The man in the mask was running hard through the woods. A shot rang out. The bullet winged his leg. He tottered against a birch tree, almost fell. He righted himself and kept running. Though now he was limping badly and there was a blood-red rip in his chino pants. And then the second shot ripped through the darkness. The bullet caught Cliff in the back. He straightened, then fell forward. And since his hands were tied, there was nothing he could do to break his fall. His head smacked down against the stump of a tree, as if he were trying to chop wood with his face. The trooper stood over him. With one wet boot, he pushed Cliff's head off the tree stump. The dying man rolled slightly, twisting in a way a living body never would. Cliff was dead. The trooper cursed. Even dead, Cliff made trouble for him, because now he would have to lug Cliff's guts all the way back to the lake. Otherwise, he couldn't pin all this mess on Jason. Disgusted, he fired a third shot into the base of Cliff's skull, and a fourth. The gun clicked out of bullets, which meant the trooper had no bullets left to protect himself against the boy who had just come up behind him. The trooper whirled, firing instinctively. Click, click. Standing before him was a tall, muscular teenager who wore another white hockey mask. For a second, the trooper's heart stood still, because for that one instant, all sanity left his brain. For one instant, the trooper's mind was telling him that the impossible was true, that the horror stories he had heard since he was a kid growing up near Crystal Lake were all true. Jason Voorhees really did return from the dead. Then a second later, the trooper realized the truth. This was just some crazy nut. Every few years, some backwoods idiot got so caught up in the Jason legend that he acted out the part. The muscular kid with the white mask and the big biceps raised his left arm high, as if in salute. He was holding something that looked like a tire iron. "Son," said the trooper, "you better..." And then the arm came down. Chapter 15. Summer Dies Young. Teddy looked down at the trooper's dead body, which was nestled among the wet, dark leaves. Blood was bubbling out from the trooper's caved-in skull. Dark red blood mixed with clots of gray-white brains. The trooper had killed Coach. Teddy saw him do it. It made Teddy's brain hiss with anger. Coach was his. He walked over to the other dead body, the one wearing the white mask. Dime store stuff. Halloween shit. It was as if this guy was mocking him, mocking the real thing. Teddy kicked up the mask off the corpse with his high-top purple sneaker. Then he knelt down and went through the man's pockets. He found one useful item, an X-Acto knife. Teddy laughed. The murdered man had been carrying a weapon the whole time, but with his hands tied, the knife had been useless. Teddy pocketed the small gray razor. There was blood everywhere, Teddy realized, not just on the trees and wet leaves. More blood and brains and guts were spattered over his own clothes than you saw on a butcher's apron. He giggled wildly. He sure had changed, he thought. In the old days, before he put on the mask, he would have been very upset to mess up his school clothes. Now, he heard a loud fluttering overhead. He looked up. Through the darkness, he saw a black cloud descending. Bats! Within seconds, the furry creatures were crawling all over the two dead bodies. Let them feast, Teddy thought as he headed off into the woods. Okay, yes, the trooper had bagged Coach, but that still left 6 more to go. Slick was silent for much of the walk. So was Summer. This is dangerous, she thought. This not talking business. It was like Slick was moving in for the kill, and talking was one of the only ways to ward him off. She knew she should start jabbering away, but she just couldn't do it. There had been so many times like this in the past, when they were on the same wavelength. They didn't have to say a word. They were communicating. She smelled the water before she saw it. The trail widened. The shock. The way the woods just opened up, giving way to the vast glassy surface, took her breath away. The full moon was reflected in the rippling water. They'd already been quiet, but now Summer and Slick both stood staring, silenced by the beauty before them. There was a dock leading out into the water. Oh no, Summer thought. Her defenses were low enough as it was. She didn't think she could handle a romantic setting. The dock beckoned to them like a gangplank. It had to be walked. Let's sit, darling, Slick said when they'd reached the end of the dock. And before Summer could object, he sat. She felt foolish standing while he was already sitting, so she sat down as well. She sat down as far from him as she could, but the dock wasn't that wide. Pretty, Slick said at last. Yeah. He grinned at her in the darkness. She grinned back. Seems like old times, he said. She took a deep breath. She was planning on saying something about how those times were gone for good, but the words wouldn't come. You're still mad at me, aren't you? He asked. She nodded. You really hurt me, you know. I know, he said. And it wasn't the first time, she reminded him. He nodded gravely. I know that too. But can I tell you something? You want to know why I cheated on you? The truth? Summer nodded. She could feel her chin trembling slightly. Slick looked out over the dark water. It was just... This is going to sound pretty stupid. Try me. It was just a total impulse kind of thing. Sometimes it's just like my body takes over. Yeah, well, wait a second. I know that sounds awful, but what I want you to know is it didn't mean anything. I can't stop thinking about you, girl. I can't stop thinking about you, Summer. That last statement took Summer completely off guard. Even if it was a line, it pleased her so much that she couldn't speak. No one knows me the way you do, he went on. It's like I never feel like myself the way I do around you. Oh, is that so? She hoped that remark would sound cutting and cynical, but her voice came out so soft that it sounded totally genuine. He stretched out along the dock. She looked up at the stars as if they might offer some route of escape. He was close by. He reached up and started rubbing her back. "Don't," she said, but he didn't stop, so she lay down on her side. Down underneath the dock, the water gurgled as it slapped against the pilings. Or maybe it was a killer lurking down there, thought Summer, remembering what Slick had told them about Crystal Lake. On the other hand, there was a more immediate threat lying right beside her. Slick edged over another inch. He was like a fox slinking through the grass. Slowly, he moved toward her. So this was it. He was making his move. Her mind noted this like it was all happening to someone else and she was just a reporter. And then his lips met hers and he rolled her over so that her back was on the hard wood of the dock and he was on top of her. They began making out with kisses so hungry they were like two vampires feeding on each other when suddenly a knife jabbed up from under the dock, slipping through the slats of the old weather-beaten wood. Summer screamed. The knife went back and forth, slicing through Summer's back and cutting her to ribbons. Chapter 16, Knitting Needles. "What are you thinking about?" Slick asked. "Huh?" Summer started. She was still sitting on the dock. He was still rubbing her back. She closed her eyes, trying to wipe out the horrid fantasy. She had only wanted to imagine him kissing her, and the next thing she knew, why was she having such gruesome thoughts? Maybe it was because she was so afraid she was going to get back together with Slick. "Summer?" She opened her eyes again. Slick nodded at her. "You've got this really scared look on your face," he said. "Do I?" Fear is a signal, she thought. My brain is trying to tell me something. Abruptly, she stood up, breaking the romantic mood altogether. "Let's go back," she said. "Everyone must be wondering where we went." Slick put two hands behind his head and smiled up at her seductively. "They'd yell for us if Coach came back, you know that." "Yeah, but let's go back anyway, okay?" she said. He thought for a moment. "Okay," he said. He held out a hand for her to pull him up, but she knew that trick, knew that if she grabbed his hand, he wouldn't get pulled up, but she would get pulled down. She didn't trust herself to go through one more test. She turned and started clumping down the dock. "Come on," she said without looking back. "You're cruel," he said, but she could hear him get up and start to follow her. So close that time, she was telling herself. Summer, Summer, Summer! Had she lost her mind? She could not get back together with Slick. Absolutely, positively could not. Not a third time. The third time would be death. "Dave!" Missy stumbled along the trail through the woods, tripping over a rock here and a root there. It was so dark, and the vines and branches kept slapping her face, almost as if they had a mind of their own, and wanted to keep her from her boyfriend. She knew she had asked Dave if he loved her too many times. She had broken their rule. But after Summer and Slick left them alone in the cabin, Dave had acted so moody. It made her panic in a big way. When she panicked, she needed reassurance. She must have asked him if he loved her about 20 times. Finally, Dave had yelled, "No, I don't!" and stormed out. She had tried to follow him, but he must have really booked out of there because no matter how fast she went, she could not seem to catch up. Or maybe she had taken the wrong trail? Well, it was her own fault. Summer was always telling her she should use her head more and not just follow her impulses. "Dave!" Missy stopped to listen, hoping she could hear his footsteps. She heard nothing, just the drip-drip of water off leaves and the sighing of the trees in the breeze. "Dave!" All at once she felt the panic rise in her throat. She was alone, all alone at night in the woods. Who knew what awful, scary beasts were roaming around the forest, ready to tear her to pieces? She started to run, moving as fast as she could with so many trees in her way. And then suddenly the dark woods parted, and she found herself facing a vast, moonlit field. Dotting the field were the charred remains of what looked like carnival rides. There had obviously been a terrible fire. Her amazement and her curiosity briefly wiped Dave from her mind. Something jogged in her memory. Didn't Slick say something about a carnival? She'd been too scared by what he was saying to listen closely. She started forward. In between her and the field was a large fence with barbed wire. But in many places the fence had been ripped apart and torn down. She stepped through one such spot. Across the field from Missy rose a burnt skeleton of an old roller coaster. Nearby stood a carousel, whose few remaining horses were black as coal. The carousel was revolving ever so slowly and leaning against one of the horses. At first, Missy thought she was seeing a mirage in the darkness. But it was true. It was Buzzy, wearing his big orange Buzzy the Bee head. He waved to her slowly as the carousel carried him gently into and out of her view. "Buzzy?" She ran to him, skipping. "Hey, Buzzy!" The burnt remains of the horses were sort of scary looking, with the wild and horrified look in their glass eyes. Missy stepped onto the slowly revolving carousel and walked to where Buzzy was standing. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, giggling. He didn't answer. He was carrying something, she saw. "And what's that?" she asked. Though he was close enough now for her to see. He was holding a tire tool. And before she had time to puzzle over why Buzzy would be carrying a tire tool, he showed her why. He began twirling the tire iron like a baton, doing a foolish parody of some of her own cheerleading moves. Missy laughed. Buzzy was such a clown. Sometimes he made her mad with all his clowning, but right now his sense of humor was greatly appreciated. "You know, Buzzy," she said, moving closer, "you came along at just the right time." She put a hand to one side of her mouth as if she were about to impart a huge secret. "Dave was just very bad to me." The large black eyes of the Buzzy bee head stared at her blankly. The bee's long stinger was only inches from her face, and pointing much more stiffly and straighter than normal. "He left me," Missy said gaily. "Left me sitting in one of those dreary old cabins. And when I ran after him, he ran too, and then I got lost." Missy, who had been so happy to see Buzzy, now suddenly found herself close to tears as she remembered Dave's cruelty. "But Dave really loves me, right?" she asked impulsively. Buzzy nodded, his stinger bobbing up and down. That made Missy feel better, knowing that Buzzy thought Dave loved her, but she still needed more reassurance. "You really think so?" she asked. Buzzy nodded again. "Say it," Missy begged. "Say Dave loves me, please, just say it." She put her hand on Buzzy's arm, squeezing, urging him to say the words. She pulled her hand back in shock. That arm felt so thick and strong. The hairs were bristly as well, like still wool. And all at once she realized that this wasn't Buzzy at all. This was someone taller than Buzzy, with a broader chest. Someone else had put on Buzzy's mask to fool her? But who? She was so confused that she said, "Dave?" And then she took a sudden step backward, though she wasn't really sure why. Buzzy's hand shot out and grabbed her, holding her in a grip of steel. Her mouth dropped open. Belatedly, it occurred to Missy that it might be a good idea to run. But by then, that powerful hand was dragging her down, right onto the floor of the spinning carousel. She tried to squirm away, but he was on top of her now, holding her in place. She screamed. The huge bee head just stared down at her, as if puzzled why she would be making so much noise. The bee's stinger was pointing at her throat. For the first time, Missy saw the black needles. The black needles that protruded from the tip of the stinger. There was something familiar about those sharp black points. Maybe if Missy had had an instant longer, just another moment, she could have figured out why, could have recognized her own knitting needles. But just then the bee lowered its head in a sudden thrust. The stinger's sharp points went through her throat. Okay, this has been chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 of Friday the 13th, Book 4 of the Camp Crystal Lake series, Road Trip by Eric Morse. Guys, I gotta say, I am loving this story. I'm actually enjoying it more than I did the Carnival book, and I'm going to tell you why. This book has done a good job of character development, but at the same time, this one seems more dark and more adult than the other three novels. I feel like maybe Eric knew this was the last book he was going to get to publish, perhaps. I'll have to ask him later. And I felt like he took the book further. He took the kills further. He took the possession angle further. And he took the deaths, of the characters further. We got a trooper whose wife was having an affair on him. The trooper straight up killed both of them. Killed the coach, just an innocent bystander, So yeah, tonight's upload was very action-packed from beginning to end. There was a little bit of character development there with the teens playing spin the bottle, some animosity between, each other. But I was not expecting a death already. In fact, usually it's like the last 30 pages before you start getting the deaths in these books. But we've still got like 60 pages to go. And we've had the coach bite the dust, we had Cliff bite the dust, and now Missy has bit the dust. And honestly, I didn't expect Missy to go until later in the book, so her death has caught me off guard. If she is in fact dead, but I mean, all those knitting needles going through her throat, Then again, we thought that Summer was dead a chapter back, but that turned out to be her just fantasizing that for some reason. But good swerve there, Eric. But yeah, guys, I'd like to hear what you guys think of the book so far. So please drop me a comment below and let me know, and I'll be back very soon with more of Friday the 13th Road Trip. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and be sure to head over to the merch store, guys. Support the channel, get you something cool to walk around in slasher style. Because if you don't, just a heads up to you about that merch store. If you don't buy something from it, then
it's got a death curse!
Nah, but seriously, guys, I don't make any money on this YouTube channel, even with thousands of subscribers. All the ad revenue goes to the copyright owners. I'm doing this, guys. It is a labor of love. I do love doing these books, and I'm going to keep doing these books no matter what. But it has been very expensive for me obtaining these books and everything. And I'll never ask you guys for donations where you get nothing in return, because I don't believe in that. But I opened up the merch store. There's 5 really awesome designs there that you can choose from, any colors, any sizes. Plus we have pillows, towels, coffee mugs, stickers, and shirts and hoodies and sweaters and all that. And guys, even on the merch store, I make very little profit from it. Teespring gets most of it, but just every little bit would really help, and I would really appreciate the support. And whenever you buy something, hey, you get something in return. And I gotta say, these designs look pretty sweet. I think you'd really enjoy them. If you go check them out, I'll put a link in the description below, and I will see you on the next one, guys. Have a great night.
Okay, stay there. Stay there. Hey! This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris, and you are listening to 80s Slasher Librarian's narration of my book, Friday the 13th Road Trip. Enjoy. No.